Hello there and welcome. As always, this is Mikhail or Michael speaking, and before the video starts, I want to say thank you all who decided to support me financially, be it through Patreon, PayPal, or Super Thanks. As always, I really appreciate your help and support, so thank you friends, and have a blessed day. Now, today's video, of course, I will start with Kursk oblast, where it seems Ukrainian offensive faced its first problems. In my previous video, I mentioned Russians pulling fresh reinforcements to the front line in attempt to not only stop Ukrainian offensive, but to counterattack and retake lost territories. And that is exactly what happened within the last 12 hours. Around Kareneva, Russians counterattacked along this road in the general direction of the villages Lyubimovka, Zelený Shlях, and Novoivanovka. And although they were unable to reach those villages, Russians advanced this much, pushing Ukrainians further from vital Korenova city, and now gaining ability to attack villages of Lyubimovka, Novoivanovka, and Zelený Shlях directly. With this territorial advance, Ukrainian control of this general area becomes too dangerous. If Russians are to continue to attack in the manner that they are right now, Ukrainian formations here in this area will quickly find themselves isolated from the rest of their force. From here, let's move to the other portion of the front where Russian counterattacks seen some relative success. Here, Russians counterattacked in the direction of villages of Malaya Loknya and Nikolaevka, and as a result of successful offensive actions were able to successfully enter and initiate the battles for the control over those villages. The situation here remains to be extremely fluid, and the status of those two villages is still to be revealed. Somewhat the same situation happened north of Sudzha, where Russians successfully counterattacked here in this area, in the direction of Kubatkin and Zazulivka villages. Although they were unable to retake it, they managed to reach it and initiate the battles for it. So as of right now, the battles for those two villages are raging on. All those counter-offensive measures forced Ukrainians to stop from advancing and start to dig in. Just like Russians, they too bring reinforcements, but it seems not to extend their zone of control, but to keep the territories they already control. As more days go by, the more effective Russian artillery and aviation becomes. For example, just recently there were news of Russians starting to use Su-34 jets on this portion of the front line. And here is a small combination of Russians conducting airstrikes on Ukrainian formations on the ground. So the initial Ukrainian tactic of using highly mechanized forces will not work anymore. Overconcentration of armor will only attract unneeded attention, which can lead to a tragedy. Just exactly as it led to the tragedy of the Russian column that was ambushed near Rylsk. I was able to find a video online, which as it seems depicts this attack. When looking into the reasons why it even happened, two come up. First of all, how were Ukrainians were able to spot Russian column? Several Russian sources claim that they were able to do so by hacking or logging in into CCTV cameras, which then they used to track Russian movements. Another reason why it happened is because for unknown reason, the column stopped for a few hours, so Ukrainians had more than enough time to spot it and destroy it on their own pace. Although tragic, perhaps it will serve Russians a valuable lesson. Now it is also important to note that in the Kursk, Bryansk, and Belgorod oblast, Russians declared the state of anti-terrorist operation. As you can see, those three oblasts stretch all across Russo-Ukrainian border, right up to Belarusian border, so it seems finally Russians decided to take Ukrainians seriously. Of course, for a long time they were talking about a buffer zone in between Russian cities and Ukrainian army, with plans to attack in order to move the front line from their cities. However, all we saw was this Kharkov offensive here. It seems that this Ukrainian offensive was a wake-up call for the Russians, and not a good one. So perhaps we're going to witness that at some point. Generally, the situation in Kursk oblast is critical but stable. Effectiveness of Ukrainian attacks is decreasing, while effectiveness of Russian counterattacks increases. And it seems that within a day or two, Russians will regain initiative. Next, we move to the Toretsk front line, where territorial changes also appeared. Very heavy battles are currently ongoing within New York City. Both Russians and Ukrainians are engaged in house-to-house, street-to-street fighting within the city itself, while the Russians are attempting to attack from Yurivka in the direction of Panteleimonnivka, Valentinivka, Sukhabalka, and Alexandropol. As a result of successful offensive actions here in this area, Russians captured those territories, which not only includes this open area, but also some of the residential area of New York City. It seems this recent territorial advance will help Russians capture this portion of New York City, which then in turn will allow them to attack and support Russian formations fighting with Ukrainians in this sector of the city. Again, as of right now, fighting in New York is very problematic for the Russians because the Ukrainians are constantly counterattacking, and within the last 12 hours, they managed to advance yet again. It happened near the center of New York, with this portion of the city coming in under Ukrainian control. The battle for New York is no easy task for both sides, but generally speaking, Ukrainians have better positions. For example, they still control this big factory, which they use as a fortress to launch their attacks here in this area. From Toretsk direction, let's move to Pokrovsk direction and discuss territorial changes here as well. Here, Russians were able to successfully advance from Vesely and Sergeyevka villages in the direction of Hordivka city. Ukrainians were unable to stop Russians and were forced to retreat, which led to the Russians capturing those territories and reaching the very first houses and streets of the city. So the battle for Hordivka had officially begun. This isn't the only place where Russians advanced. They were also actively assaulting Ukrainian positions within Ivanivka village. That too brought results, with this small portion of the front line coming in under Russian control. If we were to zoom in, we can see that Russians captured one street and this portion of the field, which puts Russian control over the village at about 60 to 50%. Then at the very last, let's discuss small Russian territorial gain north of the village of Luzavatske. Here, Russians were able to take control over those territories, further increasing the buffer zone around the village of Luzavatske. Here, Russians are attacking in attempt to capture the remaining portion of this village. However, at this point, I'm not sure whether this is part of Timofeevka or part of Luzavatske. Technically, it could be called part of Timofeevka because it is closer, but it's kind of irrelevant. What's relevant is the fact that there is a road that leads directly towards the village of Vozdvizhenka. As you can see, Russians nearly reached this village from the settlement of Nova Alexandrivka, and if they were to do so from these axes as well, capturing this village should be easier. Then at last, let's discuss the situation that is currently developing around the village of Nevelskaya. Recently, this video surfaced online of Russians putting a flag within Nevelskaya village. That alone was enough for some people to claim that the village fell to the Russians in its entirety. It seems that at this point in time those claims are far-fetched. However, the storming operation of this village continues as I speak, so perhaps at the time of you watching the video, it had already fell to the Russians. With this I end today's video. Hopefully it was to your liking and was informative enough. If it was, you know what to do. As always, humanity calls me to condemn all violence against human beings. Have a good day and always remember, Russia will be free and great.